Live, sir. Thank you so much. Good afternoon and welcome to this special meeting of the Akron Public Schools Board of Education for Monday, July 20th, 2020. Roll call.
Dr. Akbar? Patrick, we're having trouble hearing you. You're at roll call, so.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. We're having trouble hearing you.
I'm here.
You're at roll call, so.
What is happening?
Lots of feedback too. Just as a reminder, as I'm calling their microphone is not on mute. Dr. Akbar?
Here.
Mr. Alexander?
Present.
Ms. Autry?
Present.
Mr. Bravo?
Here.
Dr. Hall?
Aye.
Mrs. Mansfield?
Here.
Mrs. McKittrick?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if everyone could mute, we will do the Pledge of Allegiance now, if you would join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much. Again, welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us. This was originally scheduled as a Finance Committee meeting so that we could continue our discussions on district finances and potential for the need for a levy for the 2020 year. We are going to combine that with our continued discussion on the reopening plan. So again, we appreciate all of you taking time out of your afternoon to join us. Mr. Pendleton, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you and good evening. Thanks for noticing this meeting as a special. This is one of the more important discussions we have in terms of finance and a point in time after some pretty unprecedented events, at least in my tenure, I'm sure yours. And then a reflection on those finances puts us in a position to all brainstorm about what are the potential options. What options do we have? How do we respond? How do we reopen? And quite frankly, before I get into this brief presentation, I found myself kind of getting lost in some of those questions myself, and really had to come out, look at a 30,000-foot perspective and just remind myself that no matter COVID or pandemic or virtual or in person or some sort of blended return to school, the district is nearing the end of its levy cycle. And I'm going to bring up the presentation now, go through a short presentation, but really the feedback of individuals that I've talked to so far, and tonight is the important part. So I really welcome your questions and discussion. All right, I'm going to bring up the presentation. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Well, in Finance Committee, obviously, as with any other of the return to school committees, we all have the same values. And I thought it was really important for us to list those values. And that's all of us in the entire system and community take great pride in our educational programming. And we take pride in reaching all students. We know to do that, especially in today's global pandemic, we need students, families, teachers, and staff to feel protected and safe. But This unique circumstance that we're in, again, complicates finance more than I have ever seen in my career. And even some of the questions that we were talking to around scrimmage today, we don't have answers for, but I think it's really important that we explore all of them. So I wrote the report, again, kind of frustrated or stumbling along as I prepared this report, that I wrote this in the way that I was talking about it this weekend, and I needed to say it out loud. Point one, regardless of any global pandemic and the impact that it has on Akron Public Schools, we're at the end of our cycle for new money. On average, we go back to the ballot about every 6 years. It's been 8. This is definitely a unique circumstance before we consider placing additional money on the ballot, but we are in need of additional revenue. There's lots of different impacts that we can talk and causes for that, but that's our cycle. And then under that point, regardless of the financial impact, we will have to consider budget reductions if we don't pass additional money soon. So we want to talk through some of those realities tonight. And then point two is really the start, if not, maybe we're in the middle of the conversation on reopening. As I know, district leaders, board, bargaining groups are all grappling with the amount of information coming to you to make the appropriate decisions about how to reopen. And we will be there for you. We will be ready to be nimble enough to modify our budget to serve. Point two is, in light of the COVID-19, funding discussions for public schools are much more complicated. And then framing these questions, hopefully we can talk through a little bit tonight. The report contents is a quick financial summary about where we've been just since last November, what our books closed to be, and we've invited the Return to School Finance, the Federal and State Grants Committee, to the meeting tonight so they could see. They've been tracking this with me over our last few weeks and months. We're going to talk about levy modeling. We're going to pick a specific millage just so that you can see the impact of that. And then the start of a frequently asked questions, hopefully, that you can add to tonight. So we'll start with the November 2019 forecast as adopted by the board. And I've circled some numbers here really to identify trends and to talk about some of those takeaways. And I would like you to look at 2 lines on each one of these forecasts. The revenue surplus or deficit line, so that's, in a sense, are we balancing the budget? Are we deficit spending? Are we adding or subtracting to our cash balance? And then the circled ending cash balance with levies. Last line item, you can see in November, we were predicting to close this fiscal year at around $60 million, and out in 2024, minus 50. And this is, we're cash accounting. So there's no set aside, there's no other pots of money that fund our general operations. This is it. So we know nearing 21 or 22 with deficit spending of about 11 million or 26 million, we're in need of new money. We've known that. We've known that the trigger point to that is that revenue surplus or deficit line. And when a district starts to deficit spend, it's when we begin that discussion, or we're in the midst of that discussion for new money. So we turn the page to 2020, and we adopted a forecast. And if you remember at the time of the forecast in May, we didn't have a lot of the material relevant to closing the fiscal year end and the true financial impact. So what material am I talking about? Well, one, we didn't have CARES Act allocations, and we didn't have them drawn down. We didn't know the rules about those expenditures. We didn't know exactly what we could use that for. We knew that early on, and those committee members who are on the call tonight knew that we were trending about $500,000 or so per month less in our budget. But again, it wasn't substantial enough on a $350 million budget to say we're going to have a lot of expenses at the end of the year, and we didn't know how we would finish. So that's why we have been waiting and talking about this June forecast. And I just put some asterisks there after talking to one of our board members today, that this is not the board adopted June forecast. We will come back at some point in time. We just closed the fiscal books for the 1920 school year at June 30th and for the last few weeks. And so this is an unofficial forecast, but the numbers are pretty tight. And you can see that revenue surplus or deficit from the May forecast deficit of minus 3.6 million to a positive, adding to our cash balance about $5 million. From March 13th, 2020 through June 30th, we did monitor and report our spending trends, not only to Finance Committee, to the board, and to our committee, our Return to School Committee on the call. The district finished the year under budget to the tune of about $8.6 million. And this was due primarily to the month-to-month fewer expenses that we had, not being in session, and then 1.7 million in CARES Act that have reimbursed some of those expenses.
Hey, Ryan.
I was just going to ask for questions before moving on, please.
Yeah. Hey, Ryan. So if you scroll back up, it might be educational for some of the folks who may be joining us just to hear, when you see that, there's a $58 million end of the year cash balance, that sounds like a lot of money, right? But can you talk a bit about sort of what that actually translates into as far as days cash on hand or payrolls?
Thank you for that. So the district board policy of cash reserve talks about a 10% threshold in which the board and treasurer shall discuss not dropping below that. So that puts us, it's per budget. So that puts us in fiscal year 2020 about $34 million in cash. Now we've almost doubled that at the end of fiscal year 2020, but you can see that 2021 deficit of minus 14 million. And then the deficit in 2022 of minus 25 million, and where that asterisk is on that third year out shows you that we're reporting under the cash reserve policy. And thank you for the cash on hand. This is obviously less than 60 days cash on hand, which I know we've talked that that's more than a best practice for our corporate counterparts and our other government counterparts. We know that 1 month's payroll is around $12 to $14 million. So what is that $27 million? Again, we're in fiscal year 21. So I just wanted to show you the impact of 20, but really we're in the school year 2021 or fiscal year 21. We're predicting now of a $14 million deficit spend this year. Hopefully that answers your question and puts some parameters around a $50 or $60 million cash carryover. Those are really essential cash reserves so that we can weather future storms. We just happen to be at the end of that cycle. What other questions on where we've been in the current reconciliation to the forecast?
Anyone with questions?
All right, the next section of the report is on levy modeling, both in general about 3 different options and a specific millage amount so we can walk through. This is a little bit more of a detailed forecast. As you can see, it goes out a number of years past 5. But we talk about some measurements in this levy modeling. and levy indicators and estimates off to the right, just so we can put green and red trend indicator and then put some numbers to it so that we know, hey, we are really struggling to maintain above that 10% cash reserve policy. So we put some numbers to the left of it. And these are state of Ohio best practices in terms of how to achieve a 3 to a 5 year levy cycle. And you can see those millages are higher than what we expect. So it is not a cliche in Ohio, especially for us, when we say doing more with less. Because the true academic study of ours, and I know the report shows a little bit small, and many of you have this report in hand, the lower end range of millage, as you can see, increases over time if we don't put a levy on in the November ballot, but you can see they all start at 10 mils and above. And that's just to achieve a 3 or a 5 year cycle. And that's what I wanted the takeaway to be more specifically at this, that unfortunately in Ohio, and Akron's not unique about this, is nearing the end of cycles without additional money. Sometimes you still tighten the belt as it relates to levy passage. And this second chart shows all three millages there, 6.9, 7.9, and 8.9. We chose those mills, and just for example, 1 mill equals around $2.2 million. You can notice the nuance between those three millage scenarios, and really between the low end and the high end may buy an additional fiscal year. And that's where I think school districts, unfortunately, are not credited enough with being proactive, right? Because millage scenarios are like this all around Ohio. They don't buy us 10 years or 15 or 20. So we are back in front of the public, I'm sure more often than they are interested, and more often than we're interested in doing that. But the nuances of even 1 mill cumulative effect doesn't have much more than from the low end of 6.9 to the high end of 8.9, about 1 additional fiscal year or school year. So let's look at a specific millage estimate. So it takes that same forecast, extended forecast above. And I don't know if you can see the cursor on your screen or not, but there's a new line item under beginning balance called proposed new levies. And if you remember, our school year is the same as a fiscal year. So the 2021 school year is fiscal 21. However, tax years and calendar years are the same. So that's why you see half a year's collection of the 9.2 million right in the middle of your screen in fiscal year 22, which is the 21-22 school year, shows the full collection, and then the compound thereafter. You can see at the very bottom of your screen where it says 67 million in cash reserves, 53 million in cash reserves, and 27 million is the carried forward end of June forecast. And those numbers right above it of 67 million, 62 million, 55 million, and 42 million are the impact, impact of a passage of a levy in 2020. What you'll notice about this, and is difficult as the originator of these reports to model these and see that we still deficit spend in the 2020-21 school year to the tune of 4.8 million. And that's where I say that a cliche, unfortunately, is used far too often in schools, and that we're expected to do that, is even with the passage of a new levy in 2020, we will have to tighten our belt. We will have to become more efficient. And obviously we strive to do that every year. $4.8 million is a pretty substantial amount of money for a first year deficit spend. And you can see how that grows to 6.6 and 13.5. So this gets us about 3 years in the true academic sense. Now, what happened between 2012 and currently that got us 8 years? Well, the community board and staff was very active since 2012 in reducing our footprint. The superintendent probably can cite the number of buildings, but I know I have a chart in previous presentations that shows the number of buildings in square footage and operational efficiencies that was actively managed. And that assisted in keeping our budget trimmed to date. However, we look at that utilization of our buildings right now. We know some clusters are very, very full, but we do not have that kind of excess capacity or, I guess, benefit to reduce our footprint to right size and also save operational dollars. The next part really is to get the questions or the discussion going for the board and the superintendent is a few FAQs that I've received. And how did you plan for the reopening of the 21-20 or the 2021 school year? And this is the actual spreadsheet that we are working off of for our CARES Act. So people can see we're actually going out, bidding, purchasing, have purchased. We've purchased more than $1.6 or $1.7 million of supplies, related materials, hotspots, safety team members, thermometers, additional Chromebook covers since we're remote, assistance for bus drivers if we return, and up at the top, it's good to remind each other that if we were to open in person with all 21,000 students, this is what the operations team put in place in terms of where it says ESSER, that's CARES Act, local grant, or general fund off to the far right. So will it be that much? Probably not. We understand that we're heading to more virtual or blended. So a lot of these expenses will pull back, but remember, these have to last us till 2022. A couple other questions. What happens if we don't put a levy on the ballot in 2020? So if we were to pass an operating levy in November of 2020, we would begin collections. We'd start to see revenue from that in January of 21. Whether we put an initiative on the May or November of 21 ballot and pass, regardless of which we would pass, we would not see additional revenue until January of 22. So that's another full school year and a half of belt tightening prior to seeing any additional dollars. And then a lot of questions that I know you're asked and I'm asked, as well as from the closure of March 13th through, if the district returns in the fall virtually, will there be layoffs or furloughs? Of course, I don't have that answer today. But one thing that I wanted to clarify on the furlough language, because I know we've talked about that publicly, is school districts really don't qualify for furloughs. This would need to be conversations with our bargaining groups. And obviously, and unfortunately, school districts in Ohio have too much experience with layoffs. So this is a very, very unique time. And the disruption to our students' lives and our families' lives is incomprehensible. And to do the kind of accurate budgeting we need to do, as much as our reopening plan is changing daily at this point. So I turn this over to you, the board and the superintendent, and I welcome the conversation so I can be a good listener and take some notes here.
Good. Thank you, Ryan, for that presentation. We appreciate you sending the report ahead of time so that we could get a look at it. I left a comment in the chat. If you have questions, please let me know or raise your hand. I'll try to see you if you raise your hand, but while Ryan's sharing his screen, I can see fewer of you. So if you have questions or comments, please throw it in the chat and let me know so I can hand it over to you.
Patrick, I have a question.
Go ahead, Mr. Alexander.
This is for David and Ryan. When we talk about the levy, and we talked about different millages, what millage would you are you recommending that we select that will help us to be able to continue a good educational process for the students and keep our district afloat, and will help with the public not having to go back in their pockets too soon?
Well, I'll start, and then the superintendent can jump in. I think the first question we need to answer is whether or not we're going to go on the ballot this November or next year. As you saw from a couple of those charts, I know a little bit busy, but if we delay for a year and put a initiative on in the 2021 calendar year, we don't collect until January of 22. Technically speaking, we should be asking for additional millage than that. Now, historically, in Akron, back 30 plus years, the largest millage attempt that Akron Public Schools has ever attempted is 8.9. We actually did pass 3 or 4 levy attempts. So, practically speaking, realistically speaking, Mr. Alexander, I think the 7.9 to 8.9 mil levy is where we should be focusing our efforts. And again, the difference between those is $2.2 million. That's not just per year. Remember, that compounds out. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Alexander, I just like to add, the point that 7.9 has historically, in my history here, been kind of the sweet spot for our operating levies.
Okay.
Thank you. Good question. Anyone else? Dr. Hall?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan, for putting this together. I guess my first question was, is there a way that, to folks who may be tuning in, that are, homeowners in various parts of the city, maybe one of the things we could think about is sort of translating this in a way that makes sense to the average homeowner. So if you own a home that is valued at $75,000, or you own a home that's valued at $125,000, what does that translate in additional property tax that you'd be paying per year, with respect to the various millage amounts? The reason why I asked the question too is because I know that, I think the data I've seen is that approximately 41% of folks in Akron rent as well, right? So we can probably count on, this being passed on, in the form of, slightly higher rents as well, right? As property owners, want to pass this on. So that's my ask, is that we kind of, as we continue talking about this, try to provide some additional ways that kind of that the lay person can kind of comprehend what these large numbers and things like millage calculation, sort of what it kind of looks like, in very practical terms. So that's kind of my question / comment. I was going to ask too. I know that and again, I'm trying to speak from the perspective of a lay person, because obviously I'm on the finance committee with you, Ms. Autry. But if I'm a lay person and I'm looking at the spreadsheets that you were showing earlier, which kind of show the yearly expenditures, those numbers are going up, right? So maybe a question that a person might ask is, well, I see that in one year where it's 345 million expenditures, and next year it's 359, then next year it's 375, then it's 395. So a person may wonder, about the additional increase in expenditures, and is that something that is controllable? Yes or no, and if not, what are some of the contributing things to that? So again, so that's me trying to sort of tee you up a bit, if you will, to kind of speak more to the the public about some of these things. So
Great. On the first item, in terms of what it costs an average homeowner, yes, absolutely. We had talked about leading up to that. If the board chooses to pass these resolutions tonight, first and foremost, there is no commitment that the board will be on the ballot in November. This is the first step, calling the resolution of necessity, which gives me and directs me to go to the county fiscal office and certify those numbers, Dr. Hall, so that we can get back to the local taxpayers and say, based on the certification of these numbers, here's what it's going to cost the average taxpayer, prior to the second resolution called the resolution to proceed, placing the question on the November ballot. So that will be at a follow-up meeting where we can say, if chosen the 6.9, 7.9, or 8.9, or even in November or not, here's what it's going to cost based on those certifications. The levy expenses as it relates to this, I know board members may remember or may want to forget from our orientation in January when you first took office about that revenue versus expense chart that I drew on the board for you. And that's that really goes to the nature of school funding in Ohio, and unfortunately why there has been 11,000 school levies in Ohio since the last DeRolf case, is that the legislature with House Bill 920 eliminated the inflationary growth measure on our revenue. That's the number one reason we go back to our voting public, and every district has their own levy cycle. Ours happens to be about every 6 years. That being said, the expense side, as you all know, managing your own expenses, whether it be business or private or household, those expenses grow with wages, definitely with benefits. They have grown in the past due to school choice options. So our charter community school choice open enrollment through purchase services, those have grown. We've had some support, maybe some relief recently about some larger inflationary growth items here about electricity, natural gas, and some of our operational costs over the past few years. But traditionally, inflation hits that side of the expense equation. To the extent they're controllable, that is largely influenced by our staff. So the majority of any school district's budget is staff driven. And so when we talked about reducing our footprint and being able to be operationally more efficient, we were able to obviously reduce staff through attrition over this past 8-year cycle with the closure of buildings. That's obviously the way that any school district wants to manage its footprint. But when you have 70, in our case, 70 to 75% of our budget is staffing related costs, those are about the only ways that we can control the expense side, the largest portion of our expenses.
Good questions. Anyone else? Hearing and seeing no other questions, I know there have been there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of questions around our reopening, and we do need to get to that in a moment. Mr. Pendleton, I did want to ask, you have 3 resolutions of necessity based on different millage amounts that you were going to ask the board to entertain this evening. at 6.9, 7.9, and 8.9 mils. And again, these are resolutions of necessity. And as Mr. Pendleton pointed out, even should the board entertain these and vote on these are simply so we can certify these amounts with the Summit County Fiscal Office. We can get those amounts back and begin to plug in those finalized amounts into our equations to determine how much these levies would produce should we decide to put one on the ballot. These would not be votes to put any levy on the ballot. So if you would like to entertain those, I would suggest we probably do that now. And unless I'm mistaken, I assume since they're all the same resolution with just different millage amounts, that by acclamation we could vote on all three at the same time. Would you concur with that?
That would be my recommendation, and I believe Diana Feidel's also on the call. If she disagrees, she can correct us. But we needed three. We talked about combining them into one resolution, one consent, motion, and approval on the three separate resolutions is okay by me, unless we hear otherwise from Mrs. Feidel.
All right, and because I would, and just as a reminder to our board, there are two sets of resolutions that we need to pass no later than August 5th in order to certify any levy question to the ballot 90 days out ahead of the general election. Because we've had this discussion a few times, I would suggest that we put these resolutions to a vote now and allow the board to weigh in. And again, if the board does choose to pass these levies, then this is not officially putting this item on the ballot. I think we've said that 3 or 4 times tonight. We just want to make that clear. But it is taking the next step to allow us to determine if we were to put a levy on the ballot, which millage we would need to put forth. So I would ask at this time a motion from our board.
Mr. President, if I may, this is Diana Feidel.
Yes, go ahead.
I would recommend doing a separate vote on each of the 3 resolutions since they are separate resolutions.
Thank
Got
you
it.
for that. So we'll start with the 6.9, and I would ask for a motion from our board.
So moved. Second.
A motion by Ms. Autry, a second by Ms. McKittrick. Any comments, question, or discussion?
Yeah, just for clarification, we're going to be voting on all 3 of these so we can move forward if we need to, correct?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Any other comments, question, or discussion? Hearing and seeing none, roll call, please.
Dr. Akbar,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Ms. Autry,
Yes.
Mr. Bravo,
Yes.
Dr. Hall,
Aye.
Mrs. Mansfield,
Yes.
Mrs. McKittrick.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And on the resolution for 7.9 mils, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. A motion by Mr. Alexander, a second by Ms. Mansfield. Any comments, question, or discussion? Hearing and seeing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Ms. Autry,
Yes.
Mr. Bravo,
Yes.
Dr. Hall,
Aye.
Mrs. Mansfield,
Yes.
Mrs. McKittrick,
Yes.
Dr. Akbar, Dr. Akbar,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you. And finally, on the resolution for 8.9 mils, do we have a motion?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, there is a bit of a delay. But
A little delay.
so we do have his vote as a yes on the resolution for 8.9 mils. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
So moved.
Thank you. A motion by Ms. Mansfield, a second by Mr. Alexander. Any comments, questions, or discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Ms. Autry,
Yes.
Mr. Bravo,
Yes.
Dr. Hall,
Aye.
Mrs. Mansfield,
Yes.
Mrs. McKittrick,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Dr. Akbar. Thank you.
Thank you so much for entertaining those motions to our board. There's been a lot of
Yes.
questions and discussion on the reopening plan, and we've received a lot of feedback, and we appreciate all of that. And as many of you know, this has been an ongoing discussion for several weeks, and it likely will be an ongoing discussion for the next few weeks. We know that the community wants answers, and they would like to know what our plans are for the fall, and nobody more so than our own board and our own staff. But we want to be thoughtful, and we want to make sure that we are taking our time, and that we are our goal is to open school safely and not just quickly. So we thank you for being patient with us and for sending us your questions and your feedback. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to the superintendent to give us some additional updates and thoughts on our reopening plan. And then we're going to open it up for discussions. As usual, if you'd like to start jumping in line too with questions, please do so in the chat. Let me know that you have questions or comments, and I'll turn it over as soon as we open it up.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to just provide an update on where we are just in terms of community spread. I've talked to Summit County Public Health, of course, listened to a recent interview from the governor, and we do still continue in Summit County to have issues with community spread, which has been the basis of a lot of questions that were forwarded to us. Friday, we had an Ohio 8 Coalition meeting. That's the big 8 urban districts, and many of our sister districts are rethinking, how they're going to approach a return to school. Based on last week's board meeting, I know there were various questions posed about reopening. And, many of them, are real easy to answer. We already do Chromebooks for all of our students. Someone had a question about that. There were questions about how would, like, for instance, we had 3 options, whether we're going to, return in person, do a blended model where we looked at, grades, kindergarten to grade 2, and then 3 on up, until we get to middle school, and then our middle school through high school. And so when we looked at the blended model, we looked at, do we have enough space to have each of our K through 3 actually was the initial plan, to have those students in our elementary buildings 5 days a week. And as we've gone through and looked at 6 feet of social distancing, we could fit grades K through 2, and we still need a little bit of extra space, but to get grades K to 3 within our buildings, we would need additional space in the community that would be applicable for education. And that's a little difficult for us to find. We have very few, we auctioned off some of our vacant buildings, which really aren't great for educational purposes, which is why we auctioned them off. But we took a look at that, and it looks like we could actually fit K through 2, but would have an issue with 3rd grade. And I know there are some staff, teachers who were concerned about third graders. A couple of questions had to do with what would, in an 100% remote option, how would that look? Would it be the same as the spring? And the answer to that is no. There would be a lot more rigor and a lot more time with teachers at that level. Some of the other ones had to do more with cleanliness. And then again, what happens if someone is infected with COVID at school? Summit County Public Health has procedures for that. They do the contact tracing. Typically, a person would be referred to their physician from their family physician, and then they'd have to be isolated between 10 and 14 days. And additionally, they would need to have, I think, 3 days with no elevated temperature without a fever reducer. And so the health department would have those responsibilities of following up with people, notifying us if there are people who need to be monitored or sent home if they were exposed to someone. And that's all done through their contact tracing. Some of the other questions got more in detail about, the cleanliness of buildings. Someone had an issue about the HVAC system. With that one, basically most of the people on the building side would refer to an organization called ASHRAE, the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and air conditioning engineers for their standards about that. And they have standards which cover hospitals, office buildings, non-hospital settings. There are various filters people can purchase or other items that can be put into an HVAC system. Hospital systems are designed very differently than what a school would be. Those are some things we've looked at. We've also looked at the issue of masks. The recommendations from the state would be if you're over age 10 on up, you probably should wear a mask. And it's, up to school districts to decide. There was a question about liability, as a public agency in the state of Ohio under Ohio Revised Code. As long as we're acting, along the guidelines of what health experts are talking about, what recommendations are out there, whether it's from the CDE, Summit County Public Health, health providers that we partner with, as long as it isn't some, egregious abdication of our responsibilities to look into those things, we're pretty well protected from that. Doesn't mean someone can't sue you for something. They can, but basically we're protected under that sovereign immunity statute. I'm not the attorney, but I did check with Diana Fido from RETSO on those issues. So again, in our guidelines, the draft guidelines, which you do have, we talked about requiring people who enter our buildings to have masks, and that would be for all students, K through 12, of course, all of our staff. Some of the other issues, there was an issue about school buses, and I know there was a question about whether it's 22 or 44. That was vetted by Summit County Public Health. I know the Ohio Department of Education at the state has pushed that recommendation out to other districts. And I'm not saying that that's the end all be all. The Cuyahoga County Department of Health, working with school districts up there, recommend 1 kid per seat from the last information I had. I don't know if that changed, but there are some, basically what I'm saying, there are some challenges to having some in-person attendance at school, whether it's going to be 5 days, 2 days, or 3 days, just because of the level of community spread in our community. We also had issues about, whether water fountains are going to be cleaned. Those are part of a cleaning schedule. Someone mentioned, like checklists or whatever. There's a daily inspection form that the committee developed for elementary, middle, and high school. Similar to this building, we have our custodians wiping the high contact spaces periodically through the day. The same would happen, for our schools. I think I mentioned last week, Laura Kepler in child nutrition, is thinking that the USDA guidelines for serving meals, regardless of whether kids are in school or even remote or a combination, we believe the rules will be flexible enough so we can still do grab and go meals. We weren't really planning on having kids, looking at them in our cafeterias because of crowding concerns. If we were an in-person school, looking at having feeding done in the classroom, or having the grab and go meal service, depending on the option that the board selects. So there are, I'll be honest with you, looking at some of the stories, not just here in Ohio, in Summit County, but around the country, I think schools are coming to the realization that it's going to be very challenging to open up to in-person learning in the fall. We know that some of the largest districts in the country, like Los Angeles Unified, San Diego, and several others, are looking at remote learning. From where I sit, that might be something we may need to look at starting our school year as remote, 100% remote learning. And then as we get additional information from the state health department, our local health department, in terms of community spread, looking at going to maybe some of those blended models, slowly ramping up to possibly, full in-school learning for all of our students, but I don't know when that would happen. I would say we should probably take a look at things a quarter at a time. So midway through a semester, evaluate where things are going, and then make plans accordingly on how to make adjustments in that. My fear is if we go even with a blended model, and this is just my opinion, I respect the work of our internal committee, but when I have to look at all the data, I'm afraid when we come back, if we come back with even with a blended model, I'll have kids who will come to school, whether it's the flu, scarlet fever, indigestion, or food poisoning, or a cold, or some allergy, or what have you, where there's a temperature, we're going to have a problem. Heaven forbid, it's a case of COVID-19, we're going to have even a bigger problem, because then we're going to have to do all the contact tracing. We have to determine which staff members may potentially be impacted. And I can see us, just like we have had in some of our past flu seasons, where we might not be able to staff a building, or we're getting close to a point where, if we have large numbers of staff and students not present, it'll be very difficult to run school. And that can happen at multiple buildings. So those were, some of the things that I've been taking a look at. I know staff has been looking at. The other thing is we did send out a parent survey, which closed about 25 minutes ago. I did see some early results, and it basically just asked the parents. We sent it out to, I think, over 10,000 families, where we had the email address on their in their data, and asked them if they preferred the in-person, remote, or the blended model. And so we'll be passing that information once it's tabulated this evening. We'll be sending it out to you tomorrow. This morning, I looked at some of the data. I think we had over nearly 2,700 responses, and they were split. I think most of the folks were talking about the remote, and then to a lesser amount, but not by much, the other two options of blended and then in person. And there was also a space for them to make comments. So there's, I know a lot of parents have concerns about sending their kids into school and just making sure that they are going to be safe. Other than that, I just want to highlight, the issue. I know there have been questions about whether it's 3 feet or 6 feet. So I know the information we have from CDC, the World Health Organization, talked about 3 feet, and with face masks, reduce your potential for exposure. But when you go to 6 feet, that risk falls off by a much greater amount, as long as there's face masks being worn. So that's where some of that 6 feet issue came. I know some districts are talking about 3. I think our recommendation has been for any in-person, even in this building, we place folks who are in here at least 6 feet distant from each other, and feel that helps limit the spread, particularly with face masks, which everyone in this building is required to wear unless you're in your own office behind a closed door. So that's where we are with that. And I'll turn it over to, I think, Pat and maybe Karen Gijic, if there are any questions or they have any comments. You may have questions from any of the various subcommittees, and we'll entertain those questions. We're not asking for any kind of vote. There's a little bit more work that we would need to do, and I think we would report out again, maybe in some more fuller detail at the board meeting a week from today.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. So I just want to say again, thank you for all of the work that you and your staff and our teams are putting into this. I know it's a lot of work. I know we have a lot of questions and a lot of feedback. We continue to emails and phone calls.
Hey, Patrick, I don't know. I can't hear you.
Can everyone?
Sorry for interrupting.
No, I can't hear you either.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, a little bit.
Okay. So I just wanted to say again, I wanted to pass along my thanks to the superintendent and his staff, the assistant superintendent and their staff, for all of the work that you've put into this. I know that we've asked a lot of questions, we've passed along a lot of feedback. We continue to receive emails and phone calls and social media messages. And we've said from the beginning that this is a work in progress. This decision is going to take some time because, again, we are interested in opening schools safely, not just quickly. And so we want to make sure that we are being very thoughtful and deliberate about the process that we're using to get there. And we know that things may change, sometimes on a daily basis. The vice president and I were on a call this morning with the superintendent, following his call with Donna Skoda, our health commissioner, and things change and more information comes out. And we appreciate, again, the patience that the public has with us as we figure things out for the safety of our kids and our staff. And please just know that things will continue to change as we move along. At some point, we'll need to make a decision. But right now, as the superintendent said, there's a lot more information that we need to gather. And you heard him say that while they have originally recommended a blended model, there is some more homework that they would like to do on what it would look like if we started with a virtual option and move slowly to a blended option. So at this time, we're going to open it up for questions. And I know Dr. Akbar would like to start, and then we will go to Mr. Alexander. So Dr. Akbar?
Yeah, I don't know if Karen or someone was going to make a statement. They may answer my question. It might be helpful if they were going to say something. We heard them first. Just in case.
Yeah, I have Mary Kelly, who's present. I'm not sure she has a comment, but she's certainly available to help answer any questions.
Good evening. Dr. Akbar, at this time, we do not have a prepared statement, but we are prepared to field any questions that you may have.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so I have two questions. Well, I have more questions, but I'm just going to keep it to two for now. And this question, I don't know if this is for the superintendent or Mary or Mark or Karen or someone, but I'm specifically thinking about the superintendent's statement around having more a dynamic, more robust online learning environment for our students. than we had that we were thrust upon at the end of the last year. I'm really thinking about, and even Pat might even be able to help with this. I'm thinking about how can we best support that to happen. Would it be beneficial for our teachers to have even 1 or 2 extra weeks? I know the superintendent asked for a few days previously when we were thinking about multiple options, but now that makes me think maybe 1 or 2 extra weeks will give them time to work as a team and collaborate and create some options for our students. I'm wondering if that would even be helpful, or if there's other things that you might say that the board can support you to be helpful in providing that high quality, dynamic online learning experience for our students.
I do
Pat,
know.
Karen,
Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say
Pat, I was knocked off for a minute, but I'm back online, so I'm just here. Go ahead, Mary.
Okay, I was going to say we did have that discussion, and Karen Gijic would like to share out for us.
I would, Dr. Akbar. It's a very good question. And I appreciate the way that you asked it in relation to how we quickly had to pivot in the spring for online learning. So now we do have the opportunity, and we have been doing research, and the teachers have been joining us under Pat's direction on collaborative teams to look at what would that online learning look like? What are the schedules for students? So we know a lot more now than we knew March 20th, whenever our life changed forever. So we look forward to the time that Dr. McWilliams-Woods asked for and our superintendent has supported to move back the start of school. And right now, hearing this news tonight, we believe that we can start to plan more aggressively for that online approach.
Okay, thank you. I think I heard you, and just so that I can be clear, yeah, I think you're saying just those few extra days that the superintendent talked about previously should be enough, and more time isn't necessarily, you think that you have enough with those 3 or 4 days?
Right now, we are confident that we can start the plan with those days. And should we require more, we will come through the superintendent to this board. We don't want to ask for days just to ask for days. We want to be mindful of our students who need to be in contact with our teachers to engage around education. So we will ask, should we need, because we know that this board is generous and we know that this board supports the superintendent in relation to the education of Akron's children. So thank you for that offer.
Yeah, no problem. And I guess just to the superintendent, I don't know if this is the board agrees with me. So this is my personal statement. I would ask, I think it would be helpful if you all talked about that, and actually with the proposal that we get on Monday to talk about that all together. I think it would be helpful. I'm all for giving teachers a little more time to prepare. Not everyone is digitally native. And so being able to have more time to collaborate with your team as teachers to do something that no one really, went to school for, as a person who went to school to be a teacher myself and taught middle school with a projector screen. Everyone's not taught or go to school thing. I think that if we should consider giving our teachers a little more time. It'll be a better end product for our students and our parents, and I think a less painful process for our teachers as well. So that's just something I would want to put out there. And then last question I had, which was a part of the, I don't know, 20-page or whatever page document that you sent Dr. James about the extensive plans. And I thought it was really comprehensive. There are a few questions I have, and I'll ask you so the other ones offline. But the one that I really wanted to know, because I got 3 calls today about athletics, and a lot of people want to know about athletics. You know, I have got 2 calls about Firestone and some issue that they're having there, which I'm not even going to go into all the details. But I'm wondering, does it make sense to even be thinking about having in-person athletics at this point, knowing that the coronavirus currently is on the rise in our area?
That is a big question. It also involves music, you know, for our choirs, our bands and orchestras, as well as our sports teams, you know, and cheerleaders or other club. That's a big issue. And, you know, we're still working through that. I want to see what the Ohio High School Athletic Association is talking about. You know, we're members of the Northeast Ohio ESC, and there have been some conversations, I think, that whether schools should band together and just tell the athletic association that, you know, they do have some big concerns about sports, and particularly, you know, the contact sports where, you know, kids are in close proximity to each other. And then for some of the, you know, just the physical rigor of that, you know, those kids should be wearing masks. Is that even possible? You know, for football or something, when you're on a field and it's hot outside, and, you know, you have a lot of other issues to worry about, you know, just with hydration and, you know, and heating, and that could be a big issue. So I thank you for bringing that up, because that is something we need to discuss. And it won't be a good, let me just say this. There are lots of things that I've had to be involved with, you know, in my time as superintendent of Akron Public Schools, and many of those decisions have not been popular because they're really, you know, you're always going to have people on both sides of the question. So regardless of, you know, how we go back to school and the decisions about athletics, it will be a very hot button issue for people. You know, in this case, when we've dealt with issues before, safety should be top of mind, because we don't want to have our employees adversely impacted, and we definitely don't want to have our students adversely impacted.
Thank you.
Mr. Alexander?
I just had a couple comments. You know, and I know that all of us would love to have all our kids go back to school, fully back in school. Teachers want to be in school. Parents want the kids to be in school. But I don't think it's not going to happen. I don't think, and I want the public to know that it's probably not going to happen. So don't think that will happen. But I do like the blended learning. I like that idea. But I do also have concerns about contact, you know, and what's going on and what happened in school. So it might be better to have virtual learning. I'm not the biggest fan of that, because I know teachers want to be in there with their students, and students want to be with the teachers and so forth, because it's good for them. It's a good way for them to learn and be nourished. And so I think that, but I do think that once we get more information from you all, you guys, if you have to do more, get more information, do more research if you have to, that whatever decision you come back with, I think we probably would be willing to move forward with it, as long as we're looking at all the safety precautions, because there are a lot of safety precautions that we need to look at and try to hit all those areas so that we keep everyone safe. We want everyone, not just some people, but everyone. That means the staff, the students, of course, and the community. So those are my comments. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Dr. Hall? Dr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry, my mute button was stuck. So I think we all kind of work with the web issues. So I've got a number of comments that I'd like to make. But before I get to those comments, I did have a question to ask. I know that Dr. James referenced a survey that had a high number of responses that was closing today, and he had referenced that that those results will be shared out in due time. That reminded me that Ms. Scheidt with AEA referenced a survey with her teacher membership at the last board meeting that she had stated that she would be one to share the results of as well. So I'd be keenly interested, Ms. Scheidt, if you have those survey results handy. I would very much would like to hear, what your members shared with you via that survey.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. I would just like to say first, we have almost 2,400 members. The response we got was mainly from our 1,800 or so educators in the buildings. Our other membership would be substitutes and other types of job classifications. So out of those 1,800 educators, we had roughly 80% response rate, or almost 1,400 responses. And of those survey questions answered, we also had an additional close to 500 or so individual comments or concerns, which we're still putting into a user-friendly format. So our teachers overwhelmingly would love to return to the classroom. They're educators. They know that students do best in the classroom. However, the survey also showed overwhelmingly that our teachers felt that there were quite a few unanswered safety concerns, that safety is not guaranteed. So if we didn't have to deal with COVID, they're saying obviously they'd rather be in the classroom. However, they were very concerned that with all the guidance that has come out over the last number of weeks, and even the current guidance of all the things we're not supposed to be doing as a society, many of the things that we're recommending are those exact same things that we're not really supposed to be doing. And they're also concerned with that we're going through kind of an uptick in COVID community spread, and we haven't even gotten to the fall and winter regular flu season yet, in addition to any resurgence of COVID. They're aware of food insecurities. They're aware of instructional losses on virtual learning. However, many of the comments were, this is life and death decisions that we have to make. They're very concerned about safety. And it's not that our members don't support the models. For instance, on the 3 models that we presented on June 29th to the board, of those 1,400 or so responses, responding to the possibility of 100% virtual learning, we had almost half, or 46% of our teachers say they believe we should be 100% virtual at this time. We had, if they had to go back to blended learning, with a blended learning model, we also have about half of them that would consider that. However, the 100% virtual learning is their preference. So it's not that they don't support the models, but they believe in their comments and in their responses to the questions we asked that they believe it's just too soon to bring kids back. There's way too many, and I won't dig down in the weeds of the details of the survey unless you'd like to ask specific questions. I'd be happy to answer them. But overwhelmingly, over half of our teachers believe that at minimum, they'd like the board to tap the brakes for a moment at minimum for perhaps the first 6 weeks of school, the first grading period, and possibly even the first semester. The reason why they're saying at minimum the first 6 weeks is that for planning purposes, to be rigorous in lesson planning and lesson delivery, they don't believe as educators it's a good idea to bring students back to school or keep them out for 2 weeks, bring them back for a week or two, then have to bring them out again. They'd like to be able to plan at minimum for an entire grading period. So that's where they are. They're just, with everything that's happened, particularly in the last few weeks, they're just very, very concerned that it's not a good idea to bring students back to the buildings at this moment, or staff.
Were there any other questions that were in the survey, that you feel that the board should be aware of from either from a result standpoint, that as you sort of walk through it? Again, I haven't seen your survey, so I don't know the questions that were asked, but were there other questions that sort of jumped out at you for one reason or the other from a result standpoint that you would want to make sure that the board was aware of, and the administration?
Almost 84% felt that everybody, students all the way down to kindergarten and all staff, if we would be back in the buildings, everybody should be wearing masks. The one huge thing was, our teachers are planners, obviously. And we put things down on paper and we plan very specifically. And they believe, and I guess I do too, if I'm giving my personal opinion based on all these comments that we've made, that we can be diligent and plan, make all these contingency plans and say we're going to look at student behaviors and what if students don't do this, and put everything down on paper. But the reality of the classroom, I think I spoke about this the last board meeting, the reality of the classroom, what happens in our buildings usually is very much different than what we believe it's going to be. Our teachers have behaviors to deal with. They anticipate health concerns. 97% of our teachers believe that it will be dangerous to have to deal with our students' behaviors or health concerns in the classroom. What if a student says, I'm not wearing that mask? What if a student thinks it's funny to cough in the face of another student or in the face of a teacher? What if a child gets sick? They're asymptomatic and they don't know they're sick for a few days, and they expose people. Those 10 or 12 or 15 people in a classroom are going to take that exposure home to their own families. So we have, parents at home, we have childcare people at home, we have grandparents at home. It's just the numbers are just very, very concerning, and the what ifs that none of us can answer, the what ifs, but we do know that, at least from a teacher's point of view, as much as they want to be in a classroom, as much as they want to have face-to-face instruction with their students, the one theme that we had over and over and over again in the comments and in their responses was, it's just too dangerous, I believe, fill in the blank teacher's names. They believe it's too dangerous at this time. They believe we need to wait and see and make decisions as we get more information. That this process, while I want to honor the people that worked on this process, it was a lot of work into developing the models, but knowing what we know right now and based on what our teachers feel, they believe that we need to wait and see and just tap the brakes on returning to the buildings, even in a blended model, and see what happens and take the time to do more research and have a more purposeful plan in place.
Thank you for that. So I saw that Ms. Autry popped in the chat with a question. So I have some comments I'd like to make, but I also recognize that some of my colleagues may have questions about the survey results. So Mr. President, I'm going to hold my comments until everyone has a chance to ask questions about the survey results, and then I'd like to break back in with my commentary, if that's okay.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. That's perfect. Ms. Autry?
Yes, thank you so much. I just want to also thank the team again for putting this together. I know it was not an easy process. I definitely respect the work. Derek did ask my question about the union survey, and I'm happy to hear that information. It was a lot of that stuff I strongly suspected anyway. And I do appreciate that we did put out the parent survey, because I think that's very important. I heard from a lot of families who appreciated being able to add their input, and that's a significant number for us. Question, 2 comments actually. I was reading the report. I was wondering if this is actually in terms of using the buildings, because I had someone who was trying to use the building and they had to attach a safety plan to the permit request. And I'm just wondering, moving forward, will we have like a template so that community groups, et cetera, don't have to, I guess, figure out what a safety plan is, so we can start educating or have something attached to permits, so that, again, the community wanting to use the CLCs moving forward has that information without having to try to, guess that on their own. My other comment is, have we had any updates regarding our College and Career Academy partners and how they're going to, how some of those field trips, et cetera, projects, experiential learning is going to look like? Is there anything that they've been working on?
Yeah, there have been a couple of conversations. For instance, with our Essential Experiences program, I did speak with the folks at the GAR Foundation. They're funding that, and they're actually working through how to make those experiences virtual, and have been working with the partners. And I'll turn it over to Mary. She may have some additional commentary about that.
So at the elementary level, we are working with the GAR Foundation to create a schedule along with Karen Gijic's department, because they really do oversee that for us because it's curriculum. But our partners are looking at being scheduled into the classrooms based on our grade level curriculum standards and the program that we currently have in place. So with our first graders and their experience that they have with the Akron Zoo, it's in 2 parts, but where they have the Zoomobile come to the classroom and do some activities with the students. And then prior to COVID, they were going to the zoo. That's the part that we would be looking at, possibly doing a combination. If we are face-to-face, doing a combination of face-to-face and video. And then grades 3 through 6, we're looking at doing pretty much virtually on, we're thinking possibly Mondays, but again, it depends on what the board approves for us to make some final decisions. But we are in discussions at the elementary level. And then if Rachel would like to address any of the College and Career Academy schedules.
Yes, thanks, Mary. I would like to just share that we are ready to go with providing all of those guaranteed experiences for our students, whether it's an industry field trip, a job shadowing, college visits, in either a virtual or blended or face-to-face model. We're really just kind of in a holding pattern at this point until the board makes a final decision on what that's going to look like. And we're going to have an opportunity to be nimble in the delivery of those opportunities for kids based on whatever our instructional model is at the time. So if we start virtually, we're ready to provide those virtually. If we go to blended, we'll be able to provide that as well, and then face-to-face, just like we did last year. So I think we're in a good place to continue all of those real world learning experiences that is really critical to college and career academies.
Thank you. Ms. Autry, any follow-up?
No, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mansfield.
Thanks, everyone. Again, I want to reiterate what my colleagues have said regarding their appreciation for the team. I want to make sure that it's very clear that this board is not questioning their expertise. We're not. We know that there are folks in those groups that between them have probably 1,000 years of experience in education. So it's not that we're asking these questions because we doubt that we support all of their work. I heard from several people whose feelings were kind of hurt, and I want to make sure that we make it clear that we do support them. I think that what we're saying as far as the blended learning model and all the work that they've done is maybe not no, but maybe not right now, just because of the changes that have happened. So when this whole process started with them, we are not in the same place we are right now. So I just want to make that clear, because we are not questioning that we're just kind of delaying that plan for now. I guess I'd like to know a little about if we have plans for maybe more synchronized learning. I know at the collegiate level, that's really going to be a vital part of the semester that we're headed into. And then I don't want people to think that we're not thinking about the parents and the children in families where there's not going to be an option for someone to be home with little people. The ones that are keeping me up at night are, I keep seeing 6 and 7-year-olds trying to do distance learning. I know our parents are not just essential workers and first responders, but they're store managers, they're waitresses, they work like I do in a court, or they work at a supermarket. So they have to go to work. And so I just have to say that out loud. And I know that we are thinking about those. All of our conversations, all the conversations I've had with the administration and with other board members has involved that. So I'm just throwing that out there in case you want to talk a little bit about that also, Mr. Superintendent. Thank you.
Sure, I'll handle that one probably first, because there have been some comments about, concerns that parents have to go to work, and we do understand that. The other thing I want to talk about too is, this isn't a one-way proposition. Our students have just as much to be concerned about from our staff than just as much as staff have to be worried about the students. And here's why. After the end of a school day, we have no control where a staff member or a student goes, and what happens during those off hours, where they could be someplace in the community, depending on the situation, and get a COVID infection and then return to school and then pass it on to other people. So, that can go either way. That could be a staff member, going out to a patio restaurant or something that's crowded and then come, and somehow pick it up. You don't know, or touch the elevator button, who knows? So it's a two-way proposition. And I know our team, realizes that. I think in terms of what happened in the spring was a real quick flip. And remember, we really, we were one of the few districts that continued instruction. I mean, we had some time off. We worked with AEA to work on getting our teachers trained, and they flipped that really fast. And we were actually doing instruction. Other districts, they were just, calamity days or, not real classroom learning. And I think, Karen Gijic mentioned it, that, our staff have learned a lot from that. So I think our, online learning next version is going to look a little bit different than it did in the spring. So, I mean, we're all concerned about that rigor, that kids need to have. And I'll make a comment from my colleague, who's a union president in Cincinnati, Julie Sellers, made at our Ohio 8 meeting. She said, in the past, we've had schools closed because of polio, the flu over 100 years ago. But she said one thing that stuck with me. And she said, her teachers have to bring kids up to speed who are immigrants who show up to school and can't speak English or don't have a lot of English or maybe haven't even had school in their home country. But when they come here, and we've had experience with that, she said, teachers are notorious for getting kids caught up. And while this is a difficult time, she said, once things get back to normal, she said her teachers will be working really hard to get kids caught up. And that stuck with me when she said that, because she's right. All the things that, I've seen many of our teachers do with some of our more difficult populations because of where they are when they come here. We just have to get to that point where we can have more in-person learning. And unfortunately, from where I sit, there's just a lot of safety concerns that I have, not only for our staff, but for our students, their families, and our whole community, because this isn't just limited to the schools. We're part of, the at-large community here in Akron and Summit County. And if we don't handle this the right way, things could get a lot worse, than get better. But thank you, Mrs. Mansfield, because that pulled out that memory from that conversation on Friday.
Well, and it's perfect, right? People also are saying, well, our kids will fall behind. And it's like, Mr. Bravo and I talked earlier today, and the answer is fall behind who? Everybody's in this situation. The whole world is in this situation. We're going to keep our kids at the top of that curve, but boy, oh boy, school the way we knew it 6 months ago does not exist. So we are rewriting this narrative together, and the more we come together to do it, the best, the better off we're going to be. Thank you. And Diana, perfect point too.
We could also just hold for 1 minute. I'm messaging Bruce. He appears to have dropped off just now. I'd like to make sure that he has an opportunity to rejoin. So if we could hold for just 1 moment.
If I could just hop in here for a moment, one of my teachers corrected me. I guess I've been out of the classroom too long. A grading period is 9 weeks. I think I said 6 weeks, and I knew it was 9 weeks, but I think I misspoke. So a grading period is 9 weeks. Thank you.
I remember it that way too, Pat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A lot of numbers up here mixing together.
All right, Bruce's computer froze. He is trying to rejoin. If we could give him just a moment, please. Bruce is attempting to rejoin and may rejoin by phone. So again, just another minute. Thank you for your patience.
Not to make light, Patrick, but you sound like you're our pilot leading us through our flight. So I appreciate that.
Yes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We may experience some choppy turbulence here.
Well, while we're on pause, just I'd like to hop back in and finish my comments. I was ceding the floor for questions related to the survey. Want to make sure I get my comments in. If we can do that.
Yeah, no problem. If it's anything that Bruce should probably hear, if you could just wait.
Oh, I'll wait. No. I'll definitely wait. Not a problem. I'll wait.
He should be back on any second. I'm keeping an eye out for him.
I'm not going to make any funny comments because I have a strong suspicion that my computer is going to freeze once I make about 3 comments. It's going to freeze up. So.
What, that never happens.
Right. I think it's my computer's way of rationing how much I talk on these meetings.
I think early on you made fun of our internet. I think it's like,
you know what?
that's how I recall it.
You're right. I made fun of your internet for weeks. Dr. Akbar's as well. I made fun of everybody's internet, and then it was time to pay the piper. So
I think Bruce has joined us by phone. Let's just double check. Bruce, can you hear us okay? Said he's on the line. Bruce, you might be muted. Can you let us know if you hear us okay? All right, he said he can hear us. His phone will not unmute at the moment, but he can hear us. So, Lisa, did you have anything else before we turn it back over to Dr. Hall? And Dr. Akbar also has some comments.
No, please, back to them. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a comment.
Oh, okay, Valerie, since you haven't gone yet, why don't we go ahead and hear from Ms. McKittrick first?
Thank you. And thank everyone for your input. Of course, there is no easy choice to be made here. Of course, we're weighing several things: the health of our students, faculty, staff, and all their families is our primary concern. But that doesn't minimize the economic impact on families, the instructional loss for students, the social emotional concerns we have. And so all of these things combined make for some sleepless nights. But I keep going back to, in particular, one thing that Dr. McWilliams-Woods said, and that is that 2,300 of our students have asthma, and that is more than 10% of our student population. And when I think of a virulent virus such as COVID-19, and that it affects mostly respiratory function, the idea of putting any of our kids, teachers, staff back in buildings right now, I think right now the risk is too great. And so the idea that perhaps we, as Ms. Shipe said, tap the brakes for now, I think for me is the best option. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. McKittrick. Dr. Hall.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. President. So, I think it was Dr. Seuss that once said, sometimes the questions are complicated and the answers are simple. Certainly this is a scenario where we're dealing with some very complex questions, that COVID has presented all of us. But I think the answers are simple. The more that we kind of just sit back, pause, take a deep breath and think about it. Our priority as a board and as an administrative team is to forever and always place the health and safety of our students, teachers, staff, above all else. That is why we exist. Boiled down to its most simplest form, we exist to ensure the health and safety, of our students, staff, teachers, and families. And so having said that, some of the points that were made earlier around, and parents that I've talked to have talked about students falling behind, the lack of socialization, food insecurity. How do we address that? Of course, people that, have jobs that they need to get to, and their kids will have no childcare. But again, nothing, please don't construe anything I'm saying, to make light of that. But at day's end, our priority has to be keeping these, our students, staff, teachers and their families healthy and safe. So when you think through the numbers, I think Ms. McKittrick referenced, the number of students that have asthma. When you sort of just make a cursory examination of the lethality rates as it relates to COVID-19, it swings from anywhere from 0.5% to as high as 4%, depending upon where you're at, what country you're in, what part of this country you're in. So let's go with the 0.5% for just a moment. You apply that to 20,000 students. 0.5% is 100 students. So we're talking about 100 students that we could potentially see that we could lose from COVID. But let's say it's only 0.1%. That's still 20 students. Apply the same logic to our staff. We have 4,500 staff. 0.5% would be 22 and a half or 23 staff members. 0.1 would still be 5 staff members. So as a board member, I don't feel comfortable, making any decision that's going to place anybody's life at risk. I think Ms. McKittrick said it very well. This board is not in the business of making decisions that are going to have a deleterious impact on someone's life. So for those reasons, I can't envision a scenario where I, as an individual board member, would be supportive of anything but remote learning to start the academic year. I think Dr. James referenced cold and flu season. Well, that starts in September, October, and the flu presents just like COVID flu, so how do you distinguish, not to mention the other maladies, that student staff, can be afflicted with. And we have no idea how COVID interacts with those other types of conditions, right? So again, I just want to say for the record that I would emphatically oppose any plan that would involve back to school, in-person learning for at least the first grading period. So that's how I feel about that. And so let me just move on and make a couple more quick comments. The online education, I was very grateful for the comments that Ms. Gizik made earlier in answering Dr. Akbar's questions, because a lot of the concerns we got from parents about the online, they just didn't feel like it was robust enough or rigorous enough. And so we've had a lot more time now to sort of, work that out and to ensure that we have a more rigorous, robust online model. Our teachers have gotten a lot more practice with having to do it. So I feel much more confident about what we can offer there. As it relates to, band, athletics, choir, you won't be surprised to hear my comments on that being, that's not something I support either right now. I mean, if we're going to go so far as to go to remote learning, I just don't think I think we shouldn't go halfway. If we're in the business of protecting these students, we have to look closely at limiting their contact in other ways as well, which unfortunately would include, band, athletics, things like choir. I'm an advocate of all those things, and so, but again, I just think that we're going halfway if we don't closely examine those as well. And then last but not least, there may be folks who are on the line or that may play this back and take a harsh opinion of some of the comments I've made. I just want to say that my comments are calculated to achieve one thing, and that is the absolute health and safety of everybody that we work with and work for in this district. And I think the challenge to this group is to think about in the absence of in-school learning, what are some other ways that we can be supporting and serving our community in addition to the remote online learning? So I think the outside the box way of looking at this is, what other things can we think about? You know, there's a lot of really smart people on this line, a lot of really smart people who work for this organization, a lot of smart people in the community that we can continue to talk to and engage. So I think now is a time to continue to think about outside the box, about how we can engage and support our community. So I know that was a bit long-winded. I appreciate this group indulging my comments, and I will cede back the 40, Mr. President.
Thank you, Dr. Hall, for those comments. I appreciate and may reference a few of those in my own comments. Dr. Akbar, you also had some follow-up.
Yes. I just wanted to point out, Dr. Hall mentioned this as well, but my comments around athletics, as well as Dr. James mentioned music and art and other extracurricular activities and fine arts type programs that require a little bit more than just learning from a book, and that will require them to get together and to do activities, or even utilize instruments and all of those things. I think that part of my concern also extends to field trips. I know Rachel Teka mentioned that in her comments, but I think that if we're going to be responsible and say that we're going to do 100% remote, even if we get to a point where there is a chance to do blended learning, without a cure or a vaccine for COVID-19, I think that we all should be very mindful about the trips that we take. And as a district, we should also be mindful about any trips that we sponsor and support. And I think that that's another area where we may need to take a longer than we want to pause to protect all those involved. The other thing that I think we kind of got into a point where I think that it's kind of sounded very doom and gloom, but I want to bring it back to a little upbeat and the silver lining of it all, right? I was talking to Dr. James this morning and Patrick and Ryan this morning, and it dawned on me that we have an opportunity to be transformative. We have an opportunity to be creative. We have an opportunity to be more dynamic than we've ever been. We have an opportunity to create an educational experience that is digitally innovative and accessible, as well as transformative. Basically, that's the word I'm using. And so, we can use our staff, we can use our buildings and our technology differently, as well as create additional outlets. So one of the things that I talked to Dr. James about this morning, and this is just one idea, how do we provide more support differently to our students than we are providing now? So how do we provide on-demand, digitally accessible support for students who are needing support with their homework? So online tutoring or accessibility, things of that nature. I think that that's what this moment calls for. I think that's what it brings out. It brings us to a moment where we can totally rethink and shift the paradigm of education in Akron and really go beyond 21st century, but begin thinking about 22nd century education. And we can start that now, right here in Akron. With this pandemic, unfortunately, it led us to have to think differently, but let's look at the bright side. Maybe this is what we needed, not necessarily the deaths, not necessarily the lack in education, but maybe this is what we needed to just totally rethink and transform our educational experiences so that we can get way better outcomes. Not that we're not getting good ones now, but we can get even better outcomes for our students. And so that's what I just wanted to say. I'm excited about what the future holds as we think about being dynamic, creative, and transformative.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akbar. Are there any other questions or comments at this time? If not, I want to say thank you again to our superintendent, the assistant superintendent, our treasurer, all of their staff. I want to say thank you to Pat Shipe and Michael Householder from AEA, to our other bargaining units for their support and for giving us the feedback that we need to hear to be able to make the kinds of decisions that we need to make. None of us take lightly the decisions that I think we need to make within the coming weeks. I think you've heard from our board members and our staff the level that we're going to try and make the best decision that we can. And again, we'll stress that whatever decision we make, it kind of feels like it's one of those moments where no answer is going to be the absolute right answer. And as you've heard from some of the data, both from AEA and from the survey that was done with our own parents, the community is fairly split down the middle. It seems that you have about, as the superintendent said before, in another conversation, about 40% of the community would like to see us send our kids back to school. Another 40% would like to see us go virtual. And there are probably about 20% who haven't made up their minds yet. And no decision is going to be the right decision. We're not going to please 100% of the people with 100% of the plan, but we're going to try and make the best one that we can. I love the comments that Dr. Akbar made. This is a time for us to be innovative and creative. This is a time for us to be able to take what we have and make lemonade out of lemons, if you will. We have a real opportunity here to be creative and innovative. And I know we've even spoken about Connected Learning 2.0, and we've spent a lot of our time and effort talking about a blended option. And as someone mentioned before, it's not necessarily that blended option is not an option that we're going to choose, but it may be an option that we're not going to choose today. And if so, that's okay, right? So we'll choose an option that fits us for the moment, knowing that we can still head to a blended option or to a fully in-person environment in the future as the situation betters itself. But for now, we do need to make the best decision we have with the information we have on hand. But it is a time for us to be innovative and creative, to look at how we're going to utilize CARES Act funding, to be responsible with the dollars that we do have, and be mindful of the fact that we're at the end of a levy cycle, and we do still need to, if we can't change the revenue side of the equation, then we certainly have to look at the expense side of the equation. And so there's a lot going on here, and the community should know that we're being as responsible as we can and as proactive as we can and as thoughtful and deliberate as we can. So I love the comments about innovating. I love the comments about being creative and 22nd century education and what things look like in the future. Those are just a few of my comments. Please know that we're thinking about all of you, our children and our families. We're thinking about our staff. We want to incorporate all of your voices, our teachers, our custodians, our cafeteria workers, our bus drivers. We appreciate you so much, and we know that you're being patient with us. So thank you for that. Are there any final comments, questions, or thoughts that anyone would like to share before we wrap up this presentation and this discussion? Hearing and seeing none, Mr. Superintendent, Mr. Treasurer, are there any other, is there any other information to come before this board?
Not this evening.
No, thank you.
Thank you so much. At this time, then, we will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. A motion by Ms. McKittrick, a second by Mr. Alexander. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you so much. This meeting for the Akron Public Schools Board of Education is adjourned.
Stay well, everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night.
You
Thank
too.
you, everyone.
All right.